guys hear me okay? Oh, wow. That travel part, I'm not so sure that's happening a lot lately. I don't know for you, I'm going to hear this from probably a lot of speakers today, but this is my first live event in almost 18 months. I don't know, how many of you have been here into a live event recently? Wow. Okay. Well, it's just me then. But this is my first time out in a long time. I wasn't sure if the suit was going to fit this morning, but I can still button the top button, so I'm happy with that. The Pandemic 15 wasn't too bad. But I'm glad to be here. It's a pleasure to be here for this inaugural event. I'm going to spend the next half an hour or so just walking you through some of the things that are happening in our security industry and talk to you about some things that you can do to best practices, other ideas that might help you in your day-to-day business. There's been a lot of disruption in our security industry today, and there's always opportunity from those disruptions. There's 3 chapters of today's presentation. If my clicker works, it did work. There it goes. I'm going to talk about 3 different topics today. Let's think about it as 3 different chapters. We're going to talk about something called the Thales Data Security Report. This is an annual report that Thales does, focuses on data security. A lot of other companies do this. I think ours has gotten better over time. And we have this report available, a lot of good information in there. I want to share that with you, and it might help you in your day-to-day business, just some of the findings. And we really focused on COVID and remote working in this year's report. It's a global report. The second chapter we're going to talk about today is this thing around the White House executive order on cybersecurity. The recent administration's come out, put a stake in the ground when it comes to cybersecurity, best practices. Going to talk a little bit about what does that mean and how that can apply in the commercial world as well as the federal world. I have a guest speaker that's going to join us for that portion of the presentation. I hope you enjoy that. And the last topic is around ransomware. And this is something that I think is going to be a theme of today's conference. You're going to hear from the Salvation Army speaker around their view and what happened, their response to ransomware. I mean, there's no silver bullet when it comes to ransomware, but it's not going away. I mean, as long as the hackers are making money, the cyber criminals are making money from ransomware, this is going to continue. Just going to offer the Thales view, some of the best practices and ways that you can help be proactive when it comes to preparing for those ransomware attacks. Well, before we get started and jump right in, I wanted to talk a little bit about Thales. And it's okay. How many of you have met Thales before, heard of Thales before? Hands? Great. I've got a large portion, so thank you for that. A lot of people call us Thales. That's okay. But it's really pronounced Thales. It's from the Greek philosopher, mathematician. And we've been around for a long time. The company, and it sounds like many of you know the company, but maybe you don't know the broader Thales. Very large company. We build a lot of things. We build satellites. We build air traffic control, in-flight entertainment systems for airplanes. We do ground transportation signaling, and a lot of defense, mostly in tactical communications and buoys, sonar buoys, as well as submarines. But there's one piece of Thales related to security, and that's the piece over here we are. And security is a key element of our business, and that's where I come from and the team that you have here today. Really focused on protecting data, no matter where it exists, where it moves, and we have a very strong consulting firm around security as well, too. So let me level set for everyone here in the room. I think everyone knows where we are from an industry perspective, a security industry perspective. But there's explosive data growth. There's more and more data being created and put everywhere. With COVID and people working at home, more and more mobile devices, more and more use of the public cloud, of software as a service application, data is going everywhere, and the amount of data is exploding. And part of the problem with that is there's also a ton of compliance laws. At last count, there was over 1,800 global privacy laws. And that's things like not just PCI, not things like HIPAA, but there's also GDPR in Europe, the General Data Protection Regulation. But here in the United States, you've got the California Consumer Privacy Act or Regulatory Act. Virginia just passed their state law that's close to California when it comes to data privacy. Colorado's next. But every state has their own data privacy regulation, and that continues to go forward. And what does that create for all of you as CISOs? It creates complexity. And when we go out and talk to our customer base, we have found that over half of our customers rank operational complexity as the #1 reason of how they implement security, data security to protect against all these different privacy regulations. And so we're going to talk today about ways that we can make it a little bit easier for you to protect all your information no matter where it exists. And that last metric up there regarding data breaches, 18.8 billion data breaches occurred in the first half of 2021. It's an amazing statistic. It's not happening. It's not a matter of if, but when you're going to get breached, how you react to that, what's your resilience. And the idea is to get prepared now for what's inevitable and coming your way. So that kind of frames some of the things I'm going to talk about in this Thales data threat report. You can download this off the web. It's free. You don't have to pay anything. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to take a look at it. And I'm excited about it because we've been doing this for many years. It's getting more and more mature. And we work with an outside company called 451 Research. And we went out and we surveyed over 2,500 CISOs, security experts around the world. So this is a global report. And we ask a whole bunch of survey questions. And we take the data that we get, and we can segregate it per geography. We have a US Fed edition, federal edition. We've got a North America, America's edition, and other parts that we can segregate the data. But it gives you kind of an insight into what your peers or maybe the industry is seeing from a data threat perspective. So this year, there were 5 major findings. And I'm going to, well, from my perspective, 5 major findings. There's a lot more in the data itself. I'm going to talk about 5 major findings from this year's report. We did focus on COVID, and we recognized that how many companies were ready to put all your workforce back out of the office, at home, remote working situation. And we found that only 20% of companies were ready for this disruption of everyone working from home. And that makes sense. Unless you were a software-only company that had everybody already working remotely, it made sense that 80% of companies weren't ready for everyone to go home. And we also found that 82% of companies are worried about what those workers are doing at their home. The people we're all using a lot of mobile devices, multiple mobile devices. We're looking for ways to get our job done. I don't want to say shadow IT, but it happens. Engineers are going to figure out how to get the job done. So there's a lot more use of public cloud, a lot more use of applications that aren't necessarily approved on your systems. One metric I don't have up here, which I thought was interesting from this report, is we asked about multi-factor authentication. We asked folks, how many of you are using MFA across all of your network? 55% of CISOs said that they have implemented MFA completely. That means there's a wide gap, 45% of organizations that haven't implemented multi-factor authentication across their organization, which is kind of astounding to me. That's one of the basic security principles these days, to make sure you have multi-factor authentication to protect yourself. It's one of those basic things that we should all be doing. One of the second major findings from this report was around cloud. We wanted to figure out, and we've seen the acceleration to cloud, we were curious about how COVID has impacted the use of cloud. I hope none of these metrics up here surprise anyone. This has been increasing over the years we've been doing this report, but multiple folks are using platform as a service, more than one platform as a service vendor. Using multiple IaaS, infrastructure as a service vendors, Amazon and someone else. And you can see that some folks, over a quarter, some organizations have over 50 SaaS apps in their organization today. So it's continued use of public cloud and applications outside of your organization. So what does that mean? We asked about how much data is being stored in those environments. 50% stated that over 40% of their data is in those environments, but also 50% said they're not protecting that data. Only 17% of the respondents to this survey are saying they have over 60% or 50% of data, encrypted in those types of applications. And that's pretty astounding. I mean, we're using all these different environments, but folks openly admit that they're not protecting the information that goes out there. Again, a very basic security principle that really is kind of scary. And then another metric, not to be too fearful, but I thought was pretty amazing, was that only a quarter of CISOs know where their critical data is, where it is outside of their organization. I did this presentation about Data Threat Report a couple weeks ago, virtually. I already told you I haven't been with people recently, but virtually I did this presentation to a US federal audience, and I said that only a quarter of CISOs know where their data is out there, and the federal team said that's actually too high. We believe that it's a lower number. Folks have lost control of where their data is going, and that's, again, extremely scary in the sense that how can you protect information, how can you meet data privacy regulations if you don't know where your data is? So one of the other findings from the report. This next highlight really just talks about data breaches. And I won't spend a lot of time here. I think we all know that the number of breaches continue. I showed the metric earlier. Malware is one of the increasing things that's happening on our systems, and ransomware was marked as the #1 issue for companies today. And again, that comes back to the monetization. The bad guys are making money. They're going to continue to do ransomware attacks and data breaches. We asked about zero trust, buzzword. Wondered how much of this was really coming to fruition. The executive order we're going to talk about in Chapter 2 is really pushing towards a zero trust philosophy. But how much is really happening out there to meet zero trust? Now, a lot of people used VPNs, virtual private network, during this time, this COVID time. But zero trust is gaining momentum. And we found that in 76% of the folks we talked to, they're using a zero trust methodology in public cloud, but 30% actually have a plan in their organization to deal with zero trust. And if you look at the data, most of that is in APAC. Asia Pacific actually is ahead of the US when it comes to implementing zero trust, which I thought was very interesting. But the US is catching up, and there is some momentum around zero trust coming our way. And the last highlight I want to share with all of you out of this report is around this thing called quantum computing. I know this is, again, a buzz, but it's interesting that half of the folks that we surveyed do see quantum computing impacting your organization sometime in the near future. NIST, National Institutes of Standards and Technology, is running a competition right now for the next generation quantum-resistant algorithm. So when post-quantum computers are available, who knows, 5, 10 years, we've got algorithms to protect our information. And so that's coming our way. I think it's something we have to be concerned about. We've got to be ready from that crypto agility perspective. So what does this mean in summary of the report? And I do encourage you guys to download it because I think it's good for your organizations to see what industry is saying, your peers. There's really 4 kind of pillars or outcomes. We think it really comes down to if you got to discover your information, #1, that's most important. Got to make sure you're encrypting your information no matter where it is, protecting it. It doesn't have to be necessarily encryption. It could be tokenization, it could be access control. But you got to protect that information if it's in public cloud or wherever it may exist. You've got to be able to manage and store, fully manage and store your policies as well as your encryption keys across all your different environments. And last but not least, control who's on your networks. Multi-factor authentication. If you're not doing it, you got to do it. It's a baseline thing that needs to happen. So that was Chapter 1, Data Security Threat Report. I hope that you guys took a few tidbits of data from there, and if you want more, please go take a look. I want to talk now about Chapter 2, this White House cybersecurity order. This executive order was released about 3 months ago, May 11th. It basically said to all of the executive agencies, military as well as federal civilian agencies, that you need to take a look at your house, get your house in order. Take a look at what you're doing internally, make sure you have baseline security principles in place for all of your agencies, and you have to respond back to the government within 6 months. So it also talks about how can you protect and share information across different agencies, as well as civilian, as well as commercial. So why am I talking to you guys about this? We're in the commercial space, right? Well, we're seeing a lot of this federal guidance that's coming out really does apply to the commercial side. We have a lot of our commercial customers asking. A lot of regulated industry, healthcare, finance, we're going to follow what the government does. So the idea is you're seeing a lot of things come from NIST. You're seeing a lot of things come out of the Congress, Senate, around how can we come up with a vernacular, a way to share information about breaches, around ransomware attacks. How can we get better at sharing so we learn from our past to protect the future? The other element of this executive order was mapping to security itself. And it does call out the Cloud Security Act or the Cloud Act. Government's moving to cloud just like industry. How do you protect yourself? How do you find your data? We talked about data classification, data discovery. Talks about multi-factor authentication, data at rest, and data in motion. And finally talks about code integrity. A lot of this executive order came out of the SolarWinds attack, which I'm sure all of you heard about. SolarWinds attack was malicious software, was included within what was thought to be good software, and that malicious software gave access to cyber criminals within a bunch of different networks, including US federal. Code integrity, making sure your software is what you think it is so important. So I'm not an expert on this topic, but I brought along an expert with me. We're all working in hybrid environments, so I wanted to, from a CISO to CISO perspective, talk to you about what this cybersecurity order means. Bob Bigman was the CISO at CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, for a long time. He had some great insight into the executive order and what it means not just for federal agencies, but for the commercial agencies as well. Bob is a consultant now. He got out of federal service a year or so ago, year and a half ago, and we asked him to give us, Thales, his view on this White House cybersecurity order. So I hope you enjoy this. I'm going to play a video. It's about an 8 to 10 minute video, somewhere in, let's say 9 minutes. We can go in the middle, and we'll go through, and hopefully you get to see some good guidance coming from here.
My name is Bob Bigman. I am a cybersecurity consultant for companies and governments, both in the U.S. and globally. I work with companies of all size and governments of all size, mostly helping them deal with, very deep cyber issues involving Russia and Chinese hacking, and how best to minimize that risk, and what type of defenses they need to do to protect themselves. I've been in cyber for 38 years. I certainly look it, and I worked most of my time in the U.S. government at the Central Intelligence Agency, where I was the CISO for 15 years. So I have some experience with today's topic, the executive. We refer to them as executive memorandum. It's an executive order officially from the White House, and the most recent one, of course, on cybersecurity. First, a bit about executive orders themselves. It is the message from the president to the organs of the government, of the executive organizations, about you got to do something, and your work on this is going to be measured, and your progress is going to be considered and evaluated in consideration with all the other organizations, and it's something you have to pay attention to, as opposed to all the other regulations that the government puts out. On this specific one, frankly, there's been some confusion about the scope and depth of this specific order. Please understand that it only impacts the executive branch of the government. And when I say that, I mean obviously the executive organizations, the Defense Department, the intelligence community, and of course all the civilian agencies. There is impact to their contractors, but that's done through the what we refer to as the acquisition process. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. But it does not have any real impact on private industry. Now, what tends to happen in executive orders, especially ones that include requirements to NIST and to DHS, CISA, as this one does, they tend to have what are referred to as spillover effects, where the standards that are used by the government, in this case in cybersecurity, are also adopted totally voluntarily, but adopted by various private industries or other organizations like the critical infrastructure. But the intent of this is to improve cybersecurity within the federal government. Now, a word about that. In reading this EO, clearly the response here is to a number of events, specifically the Russian attack, which is referred to as SolarWinds, against the SolarWinds management infrastructure and system. The idea was that we need to greatly improve our supply chain security, and we have to greatly improve the other mechanisms that the government uses to secure data and their networks and their systems. It is heavily influenced, and this is one of the criticisms of the executive order, it is heavily influenced by the SolarWinds issue. There are some other aspects to it that are on the, I guess, cursory aspects of the cybersecurity industry, but this is truly done to address the issues raised in SolarWinds. That's why the biggest impact is in the area of supply chain. Not clear exactly what the final result will be, but in this, the task was given to NIST, National Institute for Standards and Technology, to develop a set of guidelines and standards for how the US government will procure software in the future. And it's giving them some very specific and even narrowly focused recommendations on how to do this. And it really calls for what I'll refer to as a revolution in how the government procures software that they use on their critical systems. By the way, critical systems is not clearly defined. But the idea is that now, from hence future, when the standard is applied, and by the way, it shows up in acquisition, references in acquisition documentation, that the government will require vendors to have a complete sense of code pedigree, tracing, security testing, evaluation, and continual life cycle management of their code base to ensure it's free from, the focus here is to make sure it's free from unauthorized access and misuse, but to also ensure that the software itself has some degree of fidelity and security and performs what it's supposed to do without any additional or extraneous functionality that can be interpreted or can be misused. How this is going to be done is yet for the NIST standard to be established. How this will be implemented, yet to be established. That's part of the implementation in acquisition, which occurs through GSA and a little bit through Office of Management and Budget. But the biggest impact on the EO is in clearly how the organizations that support the U.S. government provide software and support software. The next biggest area, I think, is in the area of breach coordination. Not only is the software industry and the software vendor industry now required to dramatically change how they secure their software, they have to be much more aggressive and cooperate much more with the government. This will be yet another standard that NIST will develop. Actually, I think CISA has a responsibility for in DHS to establish a new partnership with industry on how breach notification works and how breach notification will exist. There's also other aspects of this in the 9 sections of the EO. I think the next biggest one is probably in the area of increasing cybersecurity in general across the US government. These are themes not specific to SolarWinds, but are basically represent the philosophy the government's been trying to implement in the last 2 or 3 years, certainly during the Trump administration, in increasing cybersecurity. This is the one I think that impacts you all the most because it specifically calls for, as part of their modernization program, which is an earlier EO about moving to the cloud, it requires them to do 2 additional things. Number one, increase your ability to detect and prevent breaches at the endpoints. That's the EDR requirement. And the second one is to use multi-factor authentication. Excuse me, there was a third one that impacts you, which is, of course, encryption. The reference to encryption seems almost as a, frankly, an additional just sentence added to the paragraph on cybersecurity improvements. However, I think it will have some impact because, of course, the organizations in the U.S. government will be asked to demonstrate their success in doing it. And basically it says, you know, the standard line you see in all acquisitions, you know, we need to encrypt both in transit and storage, not much more guidance than that. But the notion here is, and this is my interpretation, is that from here on out, you know, government agencies, when you have specifically client data, information, customer data, or any information used on your computer networks and systems, whether it's on-prem or in cloud, that you have to provide encryption for that data. And we don't want the ability for hackers to find open repositories in Amazon VPCs, for example, and be able to walk off with it in plain text. That all data has to be encrypted. All data has to be encrypted in storage and in transit. This, as I said, it seems like an added paragraph or an added sentence to a set of requirements, other set of requirements that have more authority or have greater significance. But as I said, all these requirements will be measured. All these requirements have to be reported on. And there are dates and times associated with how long you have to meet these requirements. Some additional issues I think that are interesting in the EO, there's this notion taken from the Transportation Safety Board about when there are cyber incidents that, like the NTSB, there will be a cyber version of NTSB in which there will be a permanent body of knowledgeable people, both inside and outside government, who will sit and review all significant incidents, yet to be defined, and come up with recommendations for the government to enhance cybersecurity based on the reporting and information provided by that incident. That may have some help, may support cyber future as well from a perspective of understanding and doing something we don't do well in the U.S. government is basically study of the past. There's some other requirements regarding basically not just breach notification, but this whole notion of cooperating between industry and government on cyber incidents. This has had, frankly, a tortured history in the U.S. government and between the U.S. government and private industry. But the idea here is we really got to get better in how we share information, not just from private industry to the government, but how the government shares information, specifically information that comes in the classified channels, and how that gets basically evaluated, how that gets cleaned and scrubbed and turned into useful information in a timely way to private industry. Again, not a new topic, but something that the EO does mention and says, come on, DHS, you really have to do a better job. And we want to see better metrics, and we want to see better, and we want to see improvement in how you all share information. Because indeed, there is considerable information, mostly obtained in private industry, that if the government really had its mechanisms and processes and policies in place properly, would be very useful in at least minimizing risk to other parts of industry. So that's it. That's what I believe the EO is focusing on. In conclusion, I think the biggest part of it will be seen in the supply chain and the changes, I think revolutionary changes to software supply chain and software development. And as I said before, some impact in the area of improving cybersecurity, including encryption. Thank you.
Wow, thanks, Bob, virtually, for being here. Did you guys appreciate that? Was that useful to hear from someone? All right, I'll pass that along to him. Great individual, great gentleman that's worked in this industry for a long time. And so I wanted to share that with you. If you want more information, we'd be happy to, from a Thales perspective, we'd be happy to share that. So just to close out on this topic, I think Bob covered a lot of different elements. I tried to set those up at the very beginning. But if you look at this order from the White House executive order, we do see some security elements broken into 4 areas. You can see the call-outs in this very large document. Maintaining code integrity at the bottom of this stack really relates to the SolarWinds attack like I spoke about. In Thales, we have products we believe that work not just to code integrity with the hardware security module that was mentioned earlier, thank you for that, but just across this whole stack. Multi-factor authentication, data at rest, data protection, data discovery, as well as working in cloud type environments. So for all of you and for industry, as we continue to see this guidance coming out of the federal government and we build security best practices, think of Thales, but think also of just organizations where we need to work to improve our security posture. So kudos to the U.S. government for starting us on this journey. Okay, Chapter 3. I want to talk about ransomware. This is something, again, it's going to come back throughout this conference today. No silver bullet when it comes to ransomware. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you I have a solution that stops every ransomware attack. But we need to keep working together as an industry, as a group, customers, industry, vendors, to be able to get our hand around ransomware. As long as the cyber criminals can make money, they're going to continue to do this type of attack. So what is ransomware? Ransomware is getting inside your house inside your data center, inside your networks, and finding the critical data and holding it hostage. It is about the data. There's a second type of ransomware attack that's coming out. Sophisticated cyber criminals are now finding the data, holding it hostage, and they're looking at that data. And once they look at it, they're able to figure out what's important, and then they monetize that as well. So that's more like a breach. You're able to find the critical data and then monetize it. And that's where encryption and tokenization, data protection can help. Cyber criminals can still hold your encrypted data ransom, but if they don't know what's inside that data or what that data is, it's hard for them to remonetize. Here's some metrics. I don't think I have to go through all these. I think you guys know this. Accenture was the latest big enterprise that was in the news last week, or that was hit with a ransomware attack. But in general, we find that every 11 seconds, a business is hit by a ransomware attack. Average cost, $4.4 million. You don't always have to pay ransomware. I mean, all of you, I hope, have resilient systems, have the backups that the ransomware attacker can't get to. I hope you can recover quickly. But a lot of times, organizations are reactive to a ransomware attack versus being proactive. So NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, has come out with some guidance. The White House, the US government has put out some guidance. There are some best practices. Training is the most important. A lot of the ransomware attacks are still coming through phishing attempts, people clicking on bad links. Deploying email web security, continue to scan for anomalies on your network, as well as DNS security. So there's a lot of baseline security practices that all of us should be doing if we're not to protect against these types of ransomware attacks. From a Thales perspective, when we look at ransomware and we talk to our customers that have been impacted by ransomware, we try to break it into two areas. Think of it as a house. We don't want anyone into our house. If they get in our house, we don't want them to move freely throughout the house. But we think about the front door and the back door to the house. The front door really is certificates. Someone either pretends, impersonates a certificate or a credential. There's elevation of credentials. There's brute force login attacks to get in the front door so they can get in there and they start looking for that critical data, the cyber criminal. The back door of the house is really the other major ransomware attack we see quite a few of. It's through email. It's through phishing attempts. It's a text message. You click on a bad URL. Next thing you know, malicious software is on your network, and you have a bad guy looking for that critical data. From a Thales perspective, we believe making sure you have that multi-factor authentication, having access management, knowing who's on your network and why they're on your networks. That's not just people, that's machines, identities, that's IoT, whoever is trying to get on your networks, making sure you know who they are. We have a SafeNet Trusted Access product at Thales. Out at our booth, we can tell you more about that, but we try to protect that front door, and we have a strong offering in that area. In the back door, we believe that, again, you're not going to protect against every ransomware attack, but if you can put yourself somewhere in the data stack, and transparent encryption is a solution that Thales has that is at the file operating system level, which allows you to protect unstructured and structured data. So that second level of ransomware attack is prevented. But we also have very, very granular access controls. So the idea is only the data owner can get access to that data. Administrators and other officials that need to use the data, like maybe a database administrator, can still do their jobs, but they don't know what the data is. So when the ransomware attack begins, they can try to access the unstructured data, but they don't have the ability to do that because they don't have the appropriate controls or the appropriate access. Audit logging is extremely important. You've got to make sure that you're always, again, that continuous monitoring, continuous vigilant on your network. Look at those streams, look for malicious behavior, as well as from a forensics perspective so you can recover quickly, and close any holes in your network. Order is going to bring out a lot of commercial standards. You heard about it from Bob Bigman. National Institutes of Standards and Technology, you're going to see a bunch more guidance coming from a lot of regulatory bodies about how we as industry can help the government, vice versa, sharing of information, but also putting basic controls in place. Discover, protect, control are three words that we like to use at Thales to start as a starting point. Make sure you have the basics in place. For ransomware, you got to protect both the front door and the back door. You got to make sure people aren't coming through with bad credentials or elevated credentials. You've got to make sure that once software is installed on a network, they can't move freely throughout your organization, and you've protected your crown jewels, what's important to you. And the last thing I just want to share with everyone is be proactive. I mean, in our industry, at least in my industry, the people I deal with, Our biggest competitor are folks that don't do anything. There are a lot of CISOs out there, you'll see it in the data threat report, that they would prefer to do nothing now and wait for something bad to happen and be reactive. I mean, that's a strategy, but it's probably not the best strategy. I mean, there are things you can do today to get in front of some of these malicious actors. There are tools you can put in place. It's better to be proactive than reactive. There was a nightmare theme to this presentation, so I put this slide in. I like this slide. We use it internally. There's a lot of competition out there. Don't have time to be chasing competitors. Me too. Thales, we like to think about how can we position ourselves with our platform, with our messaging to go help White House executive order, meet those needs, meet the data privacy laws, help folks work at home during COVID, and help our customers, our colleagues, partners work through ransomware type attacks. And that's my presentation. That's my time. I want to thank you guys for your attention. I hope you found some of this useful, some good takeaways. My email address is up here. I'll be here at the conference. Love to talk to all of you if you have questions. I do LinkedIn. If you want to link in with me, happy for that as well too. But I really appreciate everyone's attention. It feels good to be back up on the stage again. I hope I met all my presentation rules. I tried not to cross my arms or turn my back too much to all of you, but it feels great to be back up in front of everyone again. So thanks again. Enjoy the rest of the conference.